Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. And I am so excited to bring to you today is your event breakfast. And this is Jessie Gibson, and she is a clinical dietitian at UT Health East Texas, which is in Tyler, Texas, right?
That's correct. The Piney Woods.
Okay. Well, welcome to the show. I'm excited to chat with you. And David T. Stevens recommended that I chat with you. And we were going to do this during Healthy Breakfast Month or something, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Back in September.
Back in September. So
Or late than never.
Exactly. And the day before Halloween. So let's not eat our Halloween candy for breakfast, right? All right. So tell the audience, what is a clinical dietitian and what do you do?
Yeah. So the dietetics profession is pretty broad. You will see dietitians in schools, nursing homes, hospitals, dialysis centers. We provide something called medical nutrition therapy, which is where you take evidence-based research, you pair it kind of with cognitive behavioral therapy to hopefully elicit a lifestyle change, right? Whether this for personal reasons or medical reasons. So clinical dietetics, we work in a hospital setting. We work with trauma patients. We work with NICU babies. We work with anyone who would need nutrition support or maybe nutrition intervention or education while in-house. We also kind of work as the gap between your medical providers, so your doctors and your physicians and your nurses, and then also your kitchen food service side of things. So we are the bridge between those two areas because sometimes the doctors, right, they don't talk or the computer system kind of makes it a little bit cryptic what they're wanting. And so if the doctor wants a patient on a high protein diet, it's our job to go down to the kitchen and make sure that our staff knows what that is, that we have that product on hand. We're fortunate enough to have a dietitian that only works in the kitchen side, just managing that aspect. A lot of smaller facilities, your dietitian will do both roles.
Oh, wow.
So that is what you will see in clinical dietetics.
Well, and that's got to be hard if you're seeing patients all the time and there's not somebody that you can collaborate with in the kitchen, because I'm going to say, who knows who's in the kitchen? And if they know about diets. Nutrition.
Yeah, we do a lot of in-services, a lot of trainings constantly. Every week, every month, we huddle and we'll go over, hey, here are some issues we've seen. Don't forget, don't put a banana on a renal tray, right? So we're constantly going over that stuff to make sure we're delivering what the physicians are ordering for the patients.
Okay, well, that's a whole nother thing is don't put a banana on a renal tray. Yeah, well, and it's, nutrition is super important, and it's relatively I'm going to say a new medical field, right? And nutrition is also very personal. Can you talk on that?
Yeah. Dietetics, when it was initially founded and started, it was almost like a home ec degree, right? It was lots of cooking, they called it the MRS degree, right? So a lot of people would take this degree and they would go be stay-at-home moms, right? And they would have all this cooking knowledge and food science and things like that. Recently, you've seen two big sectors boom, one being the medical side of things, where we're in the hospital, we have NPI numbers, we're billing insurance for our services. And so it's kind of seen more as a medical license, if you will. The other side of things that has really boomed lately would be your sports nutrition, right? I just saw a fun fact that the NFL goes through 800,000 Uncrustables a week, right? Or a year or whatever, a month. And so the sports nutrition on that side is also really growing, where you're going to see dietitians on the sidelines for every major sporting team. So nutrition is definitely coming to the forefront across the board.
Well, and I think each one of those athletes is different in their needs, and being in the food allergy world too. I mean, I know that there's a couple of football players who have their own food allergies, and you can't just go feed everybody the same thing on a football team either.
Right. The days of serving everyone a pizza after the game is long gone. These guys get very specific meal plans, very specific caloric calculations. And those are set with the team kind of in the off season, but they all do get a say in. Some people are more plant-based. Some people are kosher or halal or vegetarian. Some people love protein and only want meat. And so they have to kind of work with them, but also still meet their needs within there.
Well, and we're going to get to the breakfast thing in just one second, but during the NCAA basketball tournament, my team, NC State, one of our players is Muslim, and he was following a halal diet, and it was during Ramadan. And so they actually, so he was fasting. So they had to give him the time to go fast and then come back to the game and make sure he got the nutrients he needed when he got back. Yeah. I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah. So that's really like worlds collide with, he has to, respect that, but also, we don't want him cramping up or crashing or getting injured on the court. And so the dietitian probably worked really closely with all of that.
Okay, so back to what we were going to talk about in general, but I mean, nutrition and dietetics is very, very important to all of us. And I think there's people that pay attention to it a lot more than others, of course. And so we were going to talk about breakfast. So I'm just going to kick it off with, is breakfast really the most important meal of the day?
That is a campaign slogan. So like that, I thought that was an old wives' tale, but when I dug into it, that was really a push by Kellogg's to sell more cereal. I wouldn't say it's the most important meal of the day. I think they're all equally important. But when you compare fasted versus non-fasted as far as cognitive effects and physiological effects, there are a lot of benefits to eating a good breakfast.
Okay. And that's one thing talking about fasting, because I was doing that for a while and I really kind of missed eating my breakfast. And maybe because it was just the norm of what I've done for my 56 years of my life is to eat breakfast, but not eating until 11 o'clock really just kind of in one way made me anxious because I wasn't getting that meal.
Yeah, it depends on what your biggest goal is. If your biggest goal is weight loss, intermittent fasting, or waiting a little bit longer in the morning, that can be a tool that works for people. I personally feel like I function better if I eat something in the morning. And so, my hardest part of the day is typically my morning chunk of work where I'm seeing a lot of critical patients. And so I want to be my sharpest. So to me, it's more important to eat a breakfast and have the positive effects of getting that fuel in versus maybe the caloric lessening I would have by fasting.
Okay. So on that note, then and for you to kick off your morning, and especially when we're talking about meetings and events, a lot of meetings kick off we have breakfast at 7:30 and the general session starts at 9 or 8:30 or whatever. What are the important types of food to serve our attendees to make sure that they're paying attention to that keynote speaker and the breakouts that follow?
Yeah, it's actually really cool because, initially the research for breakfast was children because we had the school breakfast program roll out and where we're giving all kids free breakfast during testing week because we found all these studies that they were scoring higher when we fed them. And that research has trickled down to studying adults, specifically in areas like memory and recall, which if you're talking about a speaker coming in or a training session coming in to teach your employees or your staff something, you want them to remember it if you want to be able to recall it. So it's definitely worth the investment of serving a breakfast. But, I want people to kind of maybe pay a little bit more attention away from the traditional continental muffins, danishes, cereals, and kind of think about where we can maybe add value. So all of the studies, they focus on different areas. Some focus on the types of fat, some focus on the types of protein, some focus on the types of carbs. But when you boil it down, you want, a good decent chunk of protein. You want a complex carbohydrate, so something that's high in fiber, something that's slow digesting. And then you want to kind of balance some healthier fats in there. So that could be eggs, that could be nuts, anything like that.
Okay, so can you break down what would each of those things visually be for me as a meeting planner when I'm picking a menu?
Yeah, so for example, instead of serving instant oats, serving a whole or a rolled oat. right? It looks the same. A lot of people won't notice the difference. There's actually great benefits to serving that whole oat because your attention span is going to be a little bit longer because you're not having a spike and then a crash in your blood sugar from eating that rapidly digesting oatmeal. Same product, looks the same, on the line, but there is actually a difference. Adding things instead of doing like a low fat, doing like a whole fat yogurt. Right now we're getting the healthy fats in there. We're getting protein in there. I like a build your own parfait bar or individually packaged toppings. If you're talking about cross-contamination concerns for allergies, I like putting things in little cups that they can just take and put on their own tray or plate and sit down and use it versus the spoons going all over.
Which they do.
Which they do. Even adults get a little messy on the buffet. So,
they get very messy on the buffet.
We've seen a big push in like tofu scramble versus egg scramble. So we've seen a lot of that as like a protein alternative to the eggs, which works for a lot of people if eggs don't work for them. Or being more plant forward, thinking about just including like a vegetable in the scrambled eggs, right? Like peppers and onions or a spinach, tomato omelet situation. So finding areas where you can maybe just add in or swap a few things without changing the whole look of it can be cost effective, time effective, health effective.
Right. So breakfast, we have eggs, bacon, and sausage. That's typically what protein-wise is served. Are there other options that are high in protein or good levels of protein that could be swapped in for breakfast?
Yeah, whole grains, quinoa, bulgur, whole wheat, oats even do have small amounts of protein. So when you're putting these ingredients together, even nuts, you put them together, you can get a decent 10 grams of protein in something that's not really meat. So like a baked oatmeal bar, sometimes they're portable. You can add in chia seeds and flax seeds and anything like that. They travel well. They're shelf stable. They do have a kick of protein in them. So I think sometimes we negate the fact that these items are not seen as high protein foods, but they do include protein. So 3 grams here, 5 grams here, 5 grams here. Now we have a decent chunk versus thinking of just meat as our only option.
Okay. No, I like that. And just speaking of protein, and I mentioned this before we started, that I was reading the International Food Information Council's Food and Health Survey, and they asked whoever they surveyed, do you generally try to consume or avoid the following? And the number one thing on the answer was protein, that 71% of people are trying to consume more protein on a daily basis. Is that, because you mentioned some animal-based proteins there. I mean, I get a lot of comments from people who are vegan. They're like, stop asking me about my protein. And you just kind of mentioned it because it's built into those things, but we don't think about it. We only really think about protein as animal-based, but it is in spinach, right? And other things.
Yeah. So if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you're probably focusing on things called complementary proteins. So, right. Some foods, the reason why we think of meat as superior in protein is because it has all of the amino acids in one product. So you eat that and you get all your building blocks. When you're looking at some of these plant-based foods, some are lacking in certain amino acids. Some are low in like leucine per se. And so if you take one that's low in leucine and one that's higher in leucine and you pair them together, you've now made your own complete protein. Okay. So it just takes a little bit more forethought and planning and understanding how those play off of each other to make a complete protein. But it's not that it's the end all be all. Meat is the only way to get it.
Right. Okay. Now I'm going to jump back to that conversation that we had at the very, very beginning. And you're talking about you've got dietitians that are in the NFL on the teams. We don't have dietitians that are sitting in the hotels or the convention centers.
Right.
And we're kind of just stuck with this menu that we're given. How do we talk to chefs in hotels and convention centers to try to get them to give us some other options, especially for those plant-based people and or the people who have food allergies to eggs or whatever? How do we have that conversation? And I'm sure you've struggled with this as well.
All the time. And it's hard because labor is limited. So these chefs are usually thinking in terms of like can I produce this many different dishes with the staff that I have? How many individual plates am I making versus just the buffet offering? So I always try and convey it in the sense of, hey, if we include some of these options on our already existing table, we will have to do less individual accommodations, which will be easier production and staffing wise for you. At the end of the day, we work in a planning situation. You're in a customer service area, right? So you want the customer to be happy. And if the customer is asking for these things, more plant-based options, more vegan options, is that not their job to execute that? But we have to keep in mind the labor is where I feel like it's easiest to sell it to them, that we're trying to be labor smart and not make as many individual back end accommodation dishes and put better accommodating options already out on the table.
Oh, I love that. I mean, and it's like, I say it too, it's like, why not, instead of making so many personalized plates or customized plates, why not incorporate the dietary needs into the overall menu planning so that you're not having to do that? But I like the fact that you're looking at it from a labor perspective.
Yeah, that's a big kicker in food service is labor. It's hard to find. It's high turnover. And it is, a limiting factor. A lot of times we're talking about what kind of products the chef or whoever is ordering in-house. If we have enough labor to do more things from scratch, that's going to be better, right? Versus a lot of like pre-made, prepackaged stuff.
Right.
So if we can save labor time, we might allow them to save money or time by decreasing that.
Right. No, I thank you for that selling points. Okay. On one of your LinkedIn posts, because I want to talk a little bit about some other things, I saw that you mentioned that you were shifting away from some processed fats and oils. And I know there was for a long time, like, let's stay away from fats, but those are just as important to our body as protein. So, but what kind of oils should we be using? And I'm going to just say, when I go to the grocery store and I look at vegetable oil, it's soy oil. So what should we be looking at when we're thinking about oils?
I think what started this kick was the seed oil trend that everyone, maybe the past year or so, has been really focused on seed oils. Seed oils, seed oil free. That's really what triggered the deep dive.
And seed oil free. So what are the seeds?
The seeds are like your vegetable oil, right? Your canola oil, your omega-6s. Okay. So omega-6 inherently is inflammatory. Omega-3, how it's processed in the body, is inherently anti-inflammatory. And so that's why those fats get the labels that they do of more omega-3s. Omega-3s are good, omega-6 bad. But it's not quite black and white. You do need omega-6s. It's all about the ratio. So we want more omega-3s than we want omega-6s. And if you look around in your processed food and in the grocery store and in our diet, we are blasted with these omega-6s. And we don't eat a lot of fish and mackerel and a lot of that stuff traditionally. Right. In the hospital, we actually changed the type of, we give people lipids when they're not able to eat. We feed them through their blood. And we put lipids right into their blood. And we were using a 100% soy lipid product. It causes the triglycerides and some of those like inflammatory numbers to go up because they're having to process only omega-6s. They're getting no food, so there is no omega-3.
Okay.
So we've now switched to a blend where it has some omega-6s, it has some omega-3s, it has some like MCT oil and other things in there. And we're actually seeing better outcomes with those triglyceride levels.
And the omega-3s are from fish. You just said that, right? Fish.
Typically fish, but like eggs have omega-6 and omega-3s. Some of your like nuts will have omega-6s and omega-3s. And so it's all about that ratio.
That's a lot to learn.
It's a lot. If you look, it's funny because we're talking about trends, right? The trends that are coming up for the next year. I'm a TikTok girl. That's my generation. And so I think the pendulum is swinging the opposite way. And people are really obsessed with eating. They're eating on these like wooden cutting boards, but they're only doing whole foods, eggs, berries, nuts, raw vegetables. I think the pendulum is sort of trying to shift the other way. So I'm curious in the next year, if we see people just eating more whole foods and less processed foods, I think that those numbers will naturally shift.
Right. Yeah, well, and I'm doing a trend seminar right after this at 1:00 Eastern for meetings today, and looking at the trends, and it says people are going away from the ultra processed because my one friend Nina, Chef Nina, said processed is also a can of chickpeas, right? I mean that those chickpeas have been processed, but the ultra processed with the added sugar and the oils and all of that stuff, that's what people are trying to steer away from.
Yeah, I think it's a big push of this younger generation. We don't want to be sick. We don't want to be plagued with chronic illness. And so we live in the information age where everything and anything is out there. So I think people are seeing or trying to get the right idea and shift away from some of those things.
Well, and it's funny that you said TikTok because I was reading a Mintel food and beverage study, and they said, I think Chinese consumers get more of their health and nutrition information from social media.
Yeah, it's a big source of information. It's also a big source of misinformation. So finding good sources that you can trust and that you feel like speak to you and your life and current situation, I feel like it's pretty important.
Right, exactly. And making sure that we've got options for people. You mentioned kind of like a deconstructed thing that's a make your own. I like that too. And that allows for personalization because people nutrition wise, as well as just likes and dislikes on that. How can a well-balanced breakfast with the right proteins and nutrients, what does it help us do throughout the rest of the day? And does that even include a break? Because typically an event has breakfast break, lunch break, reception. How does that help us?
Yeah, I think from a mental aspect, they actually do studies where they scan people's brains after eating and they see what parts of their brains are lighting up and firing the most intensely. And when people eat well-balanced breakfast, you can see that certain parts of the brain are firing on all cylinders, meaning these people can do tasks faster, they can do them more accurate, their memory is more activated to actually store this information. And so kind of by lighting that up, by having a breakfast and then a snack and then a lunch and then a snack, 6 small meals a day, for a lot of people, that works really great because we're keeping a lot of their hormones and things within a smaller window versus having large peaks and large valleys, right? Okay. Eating a big breakfast and then not eating anything for a really long time. And then we eat a big lunch and then we don't eat anything. If we can kind of maintain a smaller window, it a lot of benefits hormonally, mentally. So that can be beneficial more long term.
Okay. No, that makes sense. So that means we need to still can spend the money if we're not trying to cut budgets.
Yes.
If we can. Yeah. But then I think it makes us help us think through things. And one of the other things, so I'm going to ask this question to a registered dietitian. One of the trends that I saw was people that are wanting to indulge, but also be healthful. So how can that indulgence, and on my slide that I put, I've got an apple and a donut. How can we balance those two things to make sure that our blood sugars are staying pretty level and we're not having those crashes?
Yeah, I think food is really interesting because it's not only nutritional to your body, but there is a cultural aspect. There is a community aspect. There is a mental aspect of people finding food comforting, or it feels good, or it makes us happy. So it's a little bit more complex than we know we should eat healthy. So only eat healthy. Right. I always encourage people, especially those who maybe struggle with like the all or nothing, like I'm either eating 5 donuts or I'm going to never eat a donut ever again. And there's no in between. I always try and tell them, how can you add value to that? Okay, you want a donut. Great. There's not a lot of protein in the donut. So why don't we add in a high protein food with that, right? So can you do a donut and a Greek yogurt? Can you do a donut and a scrambled egg, right? You can have the donut, but if we can maybe add something in that mitigates maybe some of the negative physiological effects, we've lessened that blow of just eating straight sugar.
Right. Yeah. Well, and if you think about that, I mean, typically all of our cereals are sugar, and everything that we have been eating for breakfast without the proteins is all, I mean, the pastries, like you mentioned earlier, like those the donut walls, of course, but all those muffins and those croissants, and I mean, croissants maybe not so much with sugar, but it's that carb sugar, right?
Right. It's still, it is buttery and high in fat, but at the end of the day, there's not a lot of fiber and not a lot of protein. And those are two things that really help slow down that digestion.
So we want to we want to slow down the digestion.
We want to slow it down. The faster we're breaking it down and absorbing it, the higher your blood sugar is going to spike and the higher your insulin levels go up, which means the harder they're going to crash. If you go kind of more like a slow train, your body's actually able to like absorb and utilize those as you're absorbing it. So that spike won't be as high or as hard.
Okay.
And that's where we have about things with insulin resistance and that kind of stuff for you. That's why that's so important.
Okay. And I was just going to jump to that. So diabetes, and we're October, November is Diabetes Awareness Month. One of them is. So my question is what are some of the most common dietary needs that we should think about when we're planning our menus? And I would say diabetes is one of them. But when we say diabetes, a lot of people are like, well, I can manage it on my own, or they have the monitor on their arm. But at the same time, we need to provide them food options that can help them balance that blood sugar. And I know I've done a web eating at a meeting episode on diabetes with a different dietitian, but hyper and hypoglycemic, we don't know. We personally, I wouldn't know if you were having a drop in one or the other, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people aren't diagnosed, right? They have these symptoms, or maybe on a blood level, there are like some disruptions, but they don't notice it or feel it, and it's normal to them to feel that way. But diabetes affects a large amount of the adult population. Like 1 out of 3 people have pre-diabetes, which means they're not even diagnosed. And then you add on people that are actually diagnosed with type 1 or type 2. That's a large amount of adults. When you're thinking about sitting still in a chair, you're thinking about focusing, not getting too sleepy. Your blood sugar can play a pretty big role in all of those feelings, whether that be too high or too low. And so by giving people a good breakfast, hopefully we can keep them maintained and engaged as much as possible.
So, yeah, I mean, it's just kind of, I don't want to throw this onto a meeting planner, but it would be a really good thing for me as a meeting planner to hire a dietitian. If I can't get that from the hotel or the convention center, like, why not have somebody review my menus?
Yeah, a lot of dietitians do consulting work for menus. So if you're talking about providing anything to like children, elderly people, or sick people, it has to be signed off by a dietitian. So there are people who just do menu analysis, who do consulting work for like menu planning. Some event planners, you're very special, you're very educated in allergies, but a lot of event planners, that is not their wheelhouse, and they kind of depend on whoever their food service folks are to just handle it and figure it out. And so it is important sometimes to have that referral, like you do need it, or they feel like something is so severe that it is too difficult to really process. The dietitian can go in and evaluate that.
Yeah. Because there's a lot to take in, and meeting planners are getting, hey, we ask the questions because it's a good thing to do, is to ask the questions, do you have any dietary restrictions? And then how can we help feed you, right? But there are ones that are getting the list, like a full page list of foods that they can't eat, right? And they're like, well, what am I supposed to do with that, right? And how do I feed you? And then, and actually there was a rant from one planner like a couple of weeks ago in a Facebook group, and just saying, I'm over this. How are we supposed to do this? So how are we supposed to do this?
I think there's a fine line between preference and allergy, right? Mm-hmm. People cross that line a lot of times, and it can be really frustrating to those who actually have a medical anaphylactic allergy to things versus, well, I don't like blueberries, so I'm going to say no blueberries because I'm going to give them all to me. But yeah. Right. So I think that's a fine line, allergy versus preference. But again, you're in a customer service industry, so we have to provide what people are asking for. If I have people that are really complicated, I just reach out and say, what do you typically eat? Is there any foods that you would feel would comfort you? People have safe foods, especially those with allergies, things that they feel really comfortable eating. Maybe that's a specific type of cereal or granola or whatever. So sometimes I will reach out and do like a little back end research of, okay, this is a lot. What do you eat? And sometimes you find that they're eating half the foods on their list that they say they don't.
Interesting, because maybe they're not reading the ingredients on what they're eating. I mean, apparently they're probably not making everything fresh, so they're maybe using one of those prepackaged items.
And stuff gets reformulated all the time. Companies don't have to do us a due diligence and send us an email saying, hey, by the way, we changed our processing plant. We changed our ingredient. So things that were once gluten-free might not be. And so sometimes having a computer system that is like kind of crunching those ingredients on the back end or the suppliers on the back end is necessary when you get to a certain scale, because there's so much product coming in that you can't possibly check every label.
Well, yeah. And there was a gentleman from the UK that I interviewed, Simon, and he works at Y Boston. And I think the UK actually has to put in all of the dietary information, even if they're at a hotel. I know here in the States, the restaurants have to only do it if it's 20 locations or more with the same menu. That's the food FSMLA. But in the UK, they have to do it. So, and it got brought up because he's like, if I'm donating food to a charity, I have to provide all the nutritional information with that, which is a lot of work. And
it's labor intensive.
It's labor intensive, right? Yeah. But they did change. They went through all of their menus because they had to do this. And they found, like you said, oh my gosh, we're changing these menu items because they're so caloric or they're so high in this whatever that they're like, we can't serve this anymore, right? They didn't realize how bad it was for you.
Yeah. COVID changed a lot. A lot of our people's suppliers got shut down or they couldn't ship in whatever. They had to change facilities. And so you'll notice that there was a lot of mix up going on in the market about either nutrient analysis of like the caloric intake, but also just this was processed in a peanut-free facility and now it's not. And if you're a mom who always feeds your kid the same granola bar that they love and all of a sudden now it could contain peanuts, that's a big deal. And you don't catch it unless you're checking it every single time you buy it.
Yep. Well, and that's really happened with sesame when sesame got added to the list, because I know people are adding it purposely now to their recipes. Manufacturers, I should say, not people. So where do you see the future of event food and beverage heading I would hope it's going to go like the NFL's going. And then when we're putting the NFL in there, I'm sure that the Major League Baseball and MLS has it as well, all of those different athletes. And Simone Biles, I'm sure, has her own dietary plan and things. Do you see this going in more into food service and catering?
Yeah, as a dietitian, we typically will work really closely with like chefs at these type of facilities. Even in schools, even in hospitals, we all have chefs that work there. So it's our job to make sure that what they're preparing meets their needs, but it is ultimately the chef and the food service employee's job to execute it. So I'm hoping that people are kind of just starting to care a little bit more. I think I typed up, people are sick and tired of being sick and tired, especially with these preventable issues, these, chronic diseases that are habitual or lifestyle issues. So finding good resources and finding people who you feel like listen to you and advocate for you and are kind of working on your team are super important when it comes to nutrition.
And we're thinking, when you're thinking about an event too, I'm like, I'm going to an event, I'm paying you money, you're feeding me, but I'm relying on you as a meeting planner who then is relying on an event manager at a hotel, who's then relying on the chef to provide all of this. There's a lot of change that has to happen in that realm.
A lot of hands.
Yeah.
A lot of hands. We do a lot of like huddles and debriefing constantly. Like before the event, we're briefing on here's our allergies, here's our people that we need to look out for or whatever. Then we're doing like day of, again, everyone reminder. We also want to make sure our staff has the right equipment, right? So we use allergy kits. So it's a purple kit. Nothing else in our kitchen is purple. And those are to only be used for each individual allergy case or patient or food that we're preparing. And so we're constantly doing that. Also, like auditing and checking in from time to time. I don't know what the food regulations are like for serving at like kind of like pop-up tear down events, but they're strict for us. We have to constantly be following up, having protocols in place if you can't physically be there, having someone who is able, even if that's just a catering manager who can go through a checklist and kind of be boots on the ground for you. But it takes, it's a constant checking in.
Yeah. And it's a whole nother job. Yeah. And right now it's being thrown on event planners. And then with the reliance that chefs, and this is from, I remember going to an event years ago, and I think it was at Georgia Organics Conference. And a doctor was saying, like, he was sharing an example that he went to the obesity conference and they're serving chips and brownies and everything to these doctors who are talking about obesity. But he's like, chefs don't go to nutrition school and dietitians don't go to culinary school. And so, and he was with Tulane, I think at the time, and really kind of meshing those two conversations together, because teaching both. And I think that's something that we need to look forward to, hopefully, or push for.
Oh, yeah. And collaboration is everything. If you can find a group of people that gel and work well and communicate well, like, hold on to for dear life, because do not let them go. They do not come every single day. But yeah, I would love to see, we do get some food science and cooking culinary classes, but it's nowhere near what they do. I would love to see people like double degree if they are interested in like a certain area. You can be a dietitian and also be trained culinary, right? What a cool, unique skill set would that be for people?
Yeah. Well, and I just saw on Instagram that Chef Gioni from Canyon Ranch in Las Vegas, he's the head of all of the Canyon Ranch hotels nutrition information, and chatted with him a couple of weeks ago, just doing the same thing, right? And it's like getting him and he's learned so much from different nutritionists about what to do and how they're designing their menus, and kind of like the football teams, they're designing. He's like, hey, tell us your macros before you show up to an event here, and we'll design your menu around you. You can't do that for a group of 17,000 people. So something else that you said, it was, I forgot what I was going to ask you. All right, just some basic things. So if I'm a meeting planner, what are some basic things I can think about when I'm designing my breakfast menu? Just easy tips to say, look for these things to make it a balanced breakfast.
You want to see lots of color. So whether that be fruits, vegetables, the more colorful, not only is it visually pleasing and people tend to eat more of it, but the more color, the more micronutrients you're getting in. Okay. So that's an easy tip. The other thing is look for places to add fiber. That's something that we're all chronically low on, but there are lots of great ways to put that in, whether that just be swapping a whole grain product in there or adding it as a topping or a side to an item. That can be really beneficial for a lot of people. And other than that, I think they think about protein. I mean, people are very for protein right now, so I'm sure that's right. Top of the list to add in there. But color and fiber would be two big ones that I think would really make things look more healthful. They look more nourishing on top of the actual benefits that people might receive from eating a little bit healthier.
I was just going to joke, but not like the pink icing on a donut.
No food coloring. We don't want that.
Okay, so something that you shared with me before we started was that when I ask you, what do you wish more people knew about what you do and what dietitians do? And David Stevens brought this up to me as well, that somebody said to him, is like, we're not the police, right? We're not the dietary police, right? Explain a little bit more about what you meant by that.
Yeah, so I always joke, especially with like young kids and stuff. I'm like, we're not the food police. If you see the dietitian in the cafeteria, people are like, oh, don't look at my lunch. Like, I'm having a burger today. And we're normal people. I don't ever want to take anything away from anybody. I'm always thinking about adding things in. And sometimes you get subtraction by addition. By adding in helpful things, people naturally will wean out some of those more negative things. But I wish people understood that we are not food critics. We do not judge you. We do not want you to be miserable and only eat foods that you don't like. Our job is to help you get to where you want to go. And any good practitioner, whether nutrition or otherwise, is to kind of listen to you and come up with a plan that you feel like works for you. So if If you ever have a bad nutrition experience, I would encourage you to go find someone who you feel like really hears you and supports you, because there are lots of different people out there with lots of different backgrounds that can help you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we need to think that way just in designing our menus as well. Like David posted something today, I keep mentioning him, and it was about a gym, but it's like, we have to ask the questions up front, right? What are your capabilities in providing a more nutritious menu item options, right? Mm-hmm. Can I go off of this menu that you have that's just sugar, right? Or can I bring in different items, break items that are not filled with sugar? I mean, because that's typically what break items are filled with.
Yeah, lots of carbs.
Lots of carbs.
Lots of carbs.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, this is a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much. And two things. I did want to say, you told me that you worked for a gourmet popcorn shop. So tell me a little bit about that. And you mentioned like 3 different types of popcorn?
Oh, yeah.
Not just when I was in chocolate part.
No. So I worked at a gourmet popcorn store. It was attached to a movie theater in my little small college town. And it was like the coolest job. I had been trying to get that job as long as I went to college there, because it was like the place to go. And so there were 2 types of popcorn kernels. I didn't know that. They look the same, but when you pop them, if you go to the movie theater, you get what they call a butterfly kernel. So it pops in like almost like an X formation. It has lots of wings, and those are great for like butter popcorn or cheddar popcorn because the topping is a little bit lighter. But when you look at caramel corn, they call it a mushroom because it's got more of a round top on it. Uh-huh. And those are sturdier. So they hold caramel and chocolate better. And so they were very particular about the type of popcorn for the type of topping, which I never knew.
No, thank you for teaching us that. That's interesting. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Okay, so my final question that I ask everybody is, what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience mean to you, especially as a dietitian?
I think giving people the space and the opportunity to ask questions, to speak up about their needs is really important. We used to not ask people, oh, do you have any preferences? You go to a restaurant now, I have waiters asking, do you have any food allergies? Does anybody have any allergies? That's amazing. That is leaps and bounds better than what we've done in the past. So just being a safe space for people to speak up about it is what I feel really, really important.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. All right, everybody, this is Jessie Gibson, as you can see her name there, and she works for UT Health at East Texas in Tyler, Texas, and you can connect with her on LinkedIn under Jessie Gibson. And I so appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Oh, this was so fun. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. And everybody, I'm going to take next week off because it's the day after the election, so I'm just going to take a breather. We're all going to take a breather, and I will be back in 2 weeks with a conversation about the Food Donation Improvement Act and how we can take our excess food over production and donate it to individuals in our communities. So, Jessie, thank you so much for being here. And everybody, until then, stay safe and eat well. And Jessie, stay on with me for 1 second more once I hit end. All right, everybody, have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.